Hey everybody, Rob from Karma Comic Chameleon. Today we're looking at the Malicious Compliance subreddit. First story, the most expensive phone calls on the planet. Let's jump right in. Hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories and consider becoming a channel member for channel member only exclusive content every Friday. Click the link in the description below for more information. Many years ago, more than 15, I worked as a programmer for an oil and gas automation company. This means we would design and build the computer systems for oil and gas plants, commission them, and support the operators during day-to-day operations. Because of this, my company ran a 24/7 support phone. Every week, a member of my team would get the phone and be expected to be available to answer calls 24/7. We had enough people on the team that it would roughly equate to getting the phone twice a year. Most of the employees of this company were salaried, and the 24/7 phone was written into their contract. For every phone call they took, they could charge a minimum of 1 hour in bank time. This was a good deal for them and made the 24/7 phone easier to handle. I was a little different than my coworkers in that I wasn't a salaried employee, I was an hourly contractor. My coworkers would bank their time, but I was just paid out bi-weekly. My contract also stated that if I was being paid by the company, I had to be available exclusively to the company. This was added by their HR department because a few years before, they caught an hourly contractor running side jobs for other businesses at his desk. This also meant that if they wanted me to be available exclusively to the company, they had to pay for my time. For 2 years, I knew the 24/7 phone existed, but had never had to take it because according to my contract, if they wanted me to be available, they had to pay my hourly rate after normal work hours to ensure that I was available to answer the phone when it rang. Then, as in most corporate stories, my completely awesome manager left for greener pastures and was replaced with an absolute tool. After a month of being in the office, he decided it wasn't fair that everyone took turns on the phone except for me. He declared that I would be put in the rotation effective immediately. I didn't want to cost the company a ton of money, so I tried to explain that if I'm on the 24/7 phone, that means they have to pay me 24 hours a day for 7 days. He scoffed and told me that I obviously didn't understand how business worked. I told him he didn't understand how my contract was laid out and that I'm an hourly contractor, not a salaried employee. He insisted that to be a team player, I had better take the phone or look elsewhere for employment. I didn't want to seem like I wasn't a team player, so I accepted the phone and started my clock. 7 days later, I handed the phone off to the next guy and submitted my bi-weekly invoice. It came out to just over $10,000, with $8,400 being just that 1 week of having the phone. I waited about 15 minutes before I was pulled into the manager's office. When I arrived, the manager, the head of HR, and the manager's boss, the head of the department, were there with my most recent invoice sitting on the desk. The department head just looked at me and asked what the hell I was thinking when I gave them that invoice. I explained that the new manager insisted I take the 24/7 phone, even though my contract clearly stipulates that if the company wants me available 24/7, they have to pay for every minute I have the phone. The new manager became redder with every word. When I was finished, the department manager turned to him and asked him why he didn't know this, since it's common knowledge that no contractors are ever put in that kind of position. As he was stuttering for an answer, the department head dismissed me and told me to expect my check at the usual time. The best part, during the entire week I have the 24/7 phone, it only rang twice, both during work hours and both calls asking for a specific person in the department. All I had to do was give them a phone number. Those 2 3-minute phone calls cost that company $4,200 each. After that, the new manager pretended I didn't exist and refused to talk to me for 3 months until he was moved to sales in a different department. I was at the company for another 2 years and never saw that phone again. I think a lot of people would back down being put in that situation in the manager's office. I'm glad OP stood their ground and got paid for the work they did because that's the way it was in their contract. On to our second story. You're annoyed I changed the rules? Fine. Let's jump right in. For just a bit of backstory so the relationships in this story make sense, I live at my grandma's house with my grandma, my dad, his girlfriend, and his girlfriend's daughter, who we'll call Ashley. My relationship with my dad has been awful over the past few years. I came to the realization lately that he's very self-centered and not interested in apologizing for the countless things he's done to me. Way too many stories for another time, but nonetheless, I've still tried to include him in my life and play games with him, talk with him, and celebrate his victories even though he doesn't care about mine. We basically talk twice a month, even though we live in the same house. So when arguments started becoming stupider and stupider, and he intentionally tried to start arguments with me, I felt less inclined to spend any time with him at all. These events were the final straw for me. The two arguments that really ended it for me were ones I had with him about board games. Now, first of all, I don't want to discredit having board game arguments as childish or stupid. I know most people have gotten in a silly argument over a board game, but this one didn't even take place during the game and had nothing to do with who won or lost. In this case, my dad became genuinely upset because I wanted to change the rules for a round. I asked, with all the clarification I'm about to give, if we could change the rules for the next round so you couldn't play a +4 or wildcard last. That's it. Sure, the person who had won the last round had used that strategy, but I specifically said I had used the same strategy before and it was a perfectly valid strategy, but that I just felt like playing something a little more exciting. Instead of understanding that nothing I had said was personal, my dad thought that by asking to change the rules, I was trying to upset Ashley, the person who won the first game, and began defending her like it was his duty as a knight of the round table. I clearly stated it had nothing to do with her and that I just wanted the next game to be different, but that didn't matter. My dad yelled at me for being rude and unreasonable for 5 minutes before changing the rules. After that, we only played one more game, and I thought we all had fun, but boy was I wrong. After the game ended, I asked Ashley, who is not a child but 17 years old, twice if I had hurt her feelings or bothered her in any way. She said no, that she actually had fun, and very clearly stated that my dad had been acting crazy. So clearly, my dad hadn't asked if her feelings were actually hurt, but assumed. Knowing this information, I had nothing else to say to my dad. I thought he had just overreacted and we were over it. But when I invited him to play another game the next week, he quickly made it known that it wasn't over. The next week, I asked him if he wanted to play a board game, and he said sure, on the condition that it ended before the lunch rush because he needed to work. He works with Lyft. I thought that was fair enough, and since it was about 10:45, I picked a game that would take maybe 90 minutes and decided to make some rule adjustments to make it shorter for him. The game was supposed to end when one of 3 large piles of jewels emptied, but I halved the amount of jewels in each pile, essentially halving the playtime. So me, my grandmother, Ashley, and him sat down to play a board game 15 minutes later. Before we start, I begin to explain the game to my dad and grandma. Ashley had already played the game, but before I finish explaining to them, my dad blows up at me and tells me I'd better apologize to Ashley for what happened last week, that he didn't have any fun because I was mean and rude to her. He just started berating me for like 2 or 3 minutes as I just stared at him in awe. As silly and stupid as it was, I genuinely looked at him a different way at that point. I couldn't believe he was insulting me over something so small. But I wasn't going to apologize to Ashley as much as he wanted me to, so I told him that if he wanted to admit that this argument wasn't about Ashley, I would do it. However, he refused to admit that he was the one who was butthurt, even after I asked Ashley if I upset her, and she said no right there to his face. Instead, he just insulted me for being unwilling to apologize and a know-it-all, and wouldn't stop until my grandma finally told him to. So at this point, I was livid, but we started playing the board game even though my dad is complaining the whole time. He's blocking half the board with the rule book as he whines he can't find this rule or that rule. He complains about me going first even though I was showing him how to play. He complains that I didn't explain the rules well enough and that nothing makes sense to him, and he doesn't stop berating me as we play. So I felt awful. However, I felt a little joy when he pointed out my rule change. Like last week, he got really upset about the fact that I had changed the rule for literally no reason, but I didn't complain to him. I didn't try to explain to him that I was saving him time. Instead, I just changed the rule back and continued playing the game. And the game lasted twice as long, to his own dismay, and he had to spend twice as much time than he wanted to with me, to his own dismay, and he was an hour late to work, to his own dismay. So I'm very sorry for changing the rules, Dad. I won't ever invite you to play a game again. I first thought that Dad may not be that much of a role model if he wasn't going back to work on time, but then I realized that Dad works for Lyft, and Lyft you can set your own schedule, so that kinda settles that one. It sounds like Dad has some deep resentment towards OP. I don't think this is about Ashley at all, which is something that OP stated earlier in the story. Also, if Dad's getting this angry over a board game, I can only imagine the quarrels they'll get into with real life decisions and real life discussions. Sorry to hear it, OP. I want to thank both of the OPs for posting their stories to the Malicious Compliance subreddit. You can visit them both at the links in the description below. Please do that and give them an upvote. Once again, this is Rob from Karma Comic Chameleon saying thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share it with your friends, and we'll see you in the next one.